Greetings, it is March 14th, 2025. In this video, I'm going to get into the details on the new tokenomics that Wingbits just released. But before I get into those details, I want to touch on a couple of major developments for the project. The first one is that they are launching their satellite within the next 24 hours. If you actually go into the Discord announcement, you'll actually see what time that's happening based on your time zone. But this is huge because it's going to be used to validate their network, make sure that no one's spoofing data, and ultimately make sure that there's really high quality data. And this is their biggest differentiator versus the other networks that exist today. So this is a big step in the right direction in what they're looking to achieve. The other thing is their new hardware is now shipping as of about a week ago. Those are starting to now get delivered to people. So very exciting stuff there. Obviously, the WB200 is the standalone Wingbits device. And then you have the MGW310, which is the dual miner with Geodnet. So both of those are now shipping. So very exciting things there. All right, let's talk about the tokenomics. I'm going to link the documentation in the video description. Frankly, they made it a little bit more complicated than it needed to be, in my opinion. So I'm going to try to break it down in a way that's very easy to understand. But you'll see here the total supply is 10 billion tokens. The main thing we're going to be focusing on in this video is this first section, the 40% or 4 billion tokens that's going to contributors. The first thing I want to talk about there is that they used to have it on a 40-year distribution schedule. That has now been cut in half to a 20-year distribution. And the whole thought process here is you need to be able to grow the network, and ultimately, contributors need to make enough to be incentivized to grow the network. And over time, as revenue comes in, that will take over. So I do think this is a good idea. The first 8 years is going to be what they call their growth stage. You're going to see more tokens distributed over the first 8 years. The 12 following years will be their steady phase, where it's going to be less token distribution, ultimately moving to the token burns taking over. Of course, that has to do with revenue. So when customers purchase flight data, 25% is going to cover operational costs. 50% is then going to buying back and burning tokens. 25% goes to the treasury. The second section here, in the early stages, there's going to be more burning of tokens. Over time, they're going to move to more of a token burn and mint equilibrium, if you will, because obviously as those tokens for contributors over the first 20 years start to dwindle down, they're going to need to be able to reintroduce tokens to the supply. And that is ultimately what's going to keep the network going and make sure that contributors are still earning, incentivized to be in the network. But going back to this first section here, it is broken down. The 40% or 4 billion tokens is broken down into two different buckets, if you will. The first one is what they call the network score rewards, which is 3 billion tokens or 75% of that total pool going to contributors. They do have a really detailed breakdown of how this calculation takes place. I'll link it below. It's pretty complicated. I think they could have made it a lot easier to follow, but I'm going to focus on the main point of what they're doing and what the outcome is going to be. So that's ultimately the most important thing. So the main thing they're trying to solve here is that the original calculation they had was resulting in the top 10% of stations earning 60% of the daily rewards. So basically what you had was a handful of top performing stations earning a lot of tokens. And there's this huge inequity in the amount of distribution taking place. In fact, they show an example where certain stations were earning 100 times more than lesser performing stations. So they're trying to balance that and make it so that more contributors are earning more tokens to make it worthwhile. And I think this map does a really good job of showing this. So the original tokenomics, these dots here on the map are showing how many of the stations were earning substantial rewards. Now you'll see after the change that is being made, a lot more stations are earning a lot more rewards. And ultimately the outcome here is that instead of the top 10% earning 60% of the tokens, now the top 10% will be earning 30% of the tokens, leaving 70% to go to the rest of the contributors. And then add the fact that the token distribution schedule is now cut in half, so there's more tokens to go out on a daily basis as well. They also have this map that represents the changes. It's not the best chart in my opinion, but the purple is the original. The number of stations is on the left. This is for daily distribution. So you see the vast majority of them were earning very few tokens. The bottom here is the amount of tokens that these stations were earning. So you'll see here, the vast majority of them were earning very few tokens on a daily basis. Then you had some outliers up here where these stations were earning way more. So the new tokenomics model is what you're seeing in the orange and red here, where far more stations are going to be earning more tokens. You're going to have less of these stations up here earning way more. There's going to be a much more even distribution amongst participants. So look, I think this is a good change. I'm glad they caught it and are making the changes now. Now, going back to this section here, so that's the 3 billion tokens that we just broke down. The other part of this is the 1 billion for early participant rewards. And the thing they're looking to achieve here is avoid some of the problems we've seen with other projects, particularly for early investors and early deployers. And we saw this with Helium, for example, where if you set up a hotspot in a hex, and obviously we're getting really good rewards, then all of a sudden, if a bunch of people installed hotspots in your hex, you got kind of screwed. And it was completely out of your control. And you're kind of faced with this decision of, okay, do I keep this here or do I move it to another hex? And this is going to help to offset that issue. Basically, these 1 billion tokens, representing 25% of the allocation for contributor tokens, is going to be a bonus. So if you're early in your hex, you're going to be able to get bonus rewards on top. So if your hex gets oversaturated over time for being early, you still are going to be able to get compensated for being an early deployer. So I think that's smart. So the way they have this set up is that it's going to be distributed over a 5-year period for early participants, and those will be reduced 10% year over year. So the earlier you are, the better to this. Now, one thing I will say is I always want to be as transparent as possible. So if there's criticism due, I'm going to voice my criticism. So something I want to call out in particular, and this is not just something with Wingbits. We're seeing this with a lot of projects in DePIN. And this is something I would like to see changed with projects moving forward, but that is the vesting schedule for the capital partners or investors in the company and team. The vesting schedule is pretty short, 1.5 years for capital partners, 2 years for the company and team. Again, this is something that we've seen with a lot of projects. It's not just Wingbits, but I would like to see that drawn out further to show, longer commitment to the project. I have no reason to believe that this team's not committed. In fact, I believe they are very committed, but again, if there's anything I was going to criticize here, it would be the short investing schedule. But that said, I do believe that this project has a lot of promise. Very big fan of Wingbits, but let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, I appreciate your viewership. Signing off, this is Bradley Meyer with the DePIN Connection.